Wyoming Territory, August 1878, the sun rose hard and bright over the town of Dry Creek as 17-year-old Lorna Ashby stood barefoot in her mother's parlor, her wedding dress heavy on her shoulders like a sentence. She was marrying a man twice her age in 3 hours. "He has land," her Uncle James kept saying. "He will take care of you, you will not starve." Lorna didn't care about starving. She cared about the way Ambrose Wiles looked at her like she was something he had bought with cattle and promises. She cared about how he smelled like pipe smoke and sour whiskey, and about how, 3 days ago, he had grabbed her by the chin and said, "You will learn to be quiet." He was 52. She was 18, and her future felt like a locked box. The front door shut behind her mother, who had gone to the church early. Lorna stood alone in the still house, her hands trembling at her sides. She had no one left to run to. Her father had died last winter, and with her mother too ill to work, her uncle had taken over the decision-making. She stepped to the window and looked out at the stretch of road leading toward the hills. A line of dust stirred in the distance. A single rider fast. Her heart knocked once in her chest. Dust, horse, shadow, and then the sun caught the rider's hat, his shoulders, his boots. She knew that horse. She knew that man, Pace Jarrett. He had been her friend once, years ago when she was just a girl, and he had been 19 and working cattle for her father. He had left Dry Creek after her father's funeral, no word, no letter, and she had hated him for that silence. But now, here he was, riding harder than she had ever seen anyone ride, toward the church where she was about to be handed over like a sack of flour. She did not move, not until the last second when his horse tore up the road, came to a hard stop in front of her house, and he dismounted in one breath. "Lorna," he said, pushing his hat off his brow. Dust clung to his shirt, his jaw, his boots. There was urgency in his voice, but no panic. "Just heat. You are not marrying him," she stared at him. "You do not get to say that." "I do," he said, "because I came back for you. You left. I was not ready, but I am now." She shook her head, voice trembling. "You cannot just show up, and I can." And then he turned toward the church. Lorna followed him, dress dragging through the dirt, heart pounding. The town was already gathered inside, women in their best Sunday dresses, men with hats in hand. Her mother sat pale in the front pew, next to Uncle James. And Ambrose Wiles stood at the altar with his slicked-back gray hair and a grin that made Lorna's stomach turn. The room fell silent when Pace stepped through the doors. Ambrose's grin faded. The preacher frowned. "Can I help you, son?" Pace's voice rang out like a pistol crack. "She is not his. She is mine," gasps followed. Lorna's uncle stood up. "You have no right." "I have every right," Pace said. "She is not cattle to be traded. She is not yours to sell." Ambrose stepped forward, face red. "You have no land, no money. No, I have hands. I have a back that does not quit, and I will give her a life 10 times better than what you offer." Lorna's breath caught as Pace turned to her. "Do you want to leave with me?" She didn't look at anyone else. Not her uncle, not her mother, not the preacher, just Pace. "Yes," she said. The church erupted arguments, shouts, her uncle yelling about shame and disgrace. But she did not hear it. Not truly. All she heard was the sound of Pace's hand taking hers, the warmth of it, the certainty. He led her out of the church, past the stunned townsfolk, past Ambrose Wiles who looked like he might explode. He helped her up onto his horse. She sat sideways, dress bunched, heart hammering. He climbed up behind her steady, and then they were riding hard out of town. No one chased them, not yet. They rode until they reached the edge of the valley, where the air smelled sweeter and the trees grew thick. A small cabin stood tucked beneath the pines, weathered but sturdy. "You said you had nothing," she said, sliding down from the horse. "I said I had no money. But I have this." She looked at the cabin. "You built it," he nodded. "Started last spring. Been working fence lines and hauling freight for the lumbermen. Saved what I could. I was coming back for you. I just did not know it would be that close." She turned to him. "You really meant what you said in there." He stepped forward, close enough that she could see the sweat on his brow, the worry in his eyes. "I love you, Lorna. I always have. I just did not know how to say it when I was younger. I left because I was scared I would not be enough for you. And now, I am still scared, but I will fight for you every day." Her throat tightened. He reached out, brushing her cheek with the back of his fingers. "If you want to go back, I will take you." She shook her head. "I am not going back." "You sure?" She looked around at the pines, at the little cabin, at the man in front of her who had just stopped her wedding in front of a town full of people. "I am sure," he smiled, quiet and full of something that looked like relief. "Then come inside." "You must be hungry," she laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I just ran from my own wedding, and you are offering me biscuits, better than whiskey breath and bruises." She stepped closer. "You came back for me," he nodded. "I always was yours." And for the first time in months, Lorna felt like she could breathe. They spent the evening side by side chopping wood, cooking beans, sharing stories. He told her about the storms he had ridden through, the days he had spent thinking about what he would say if he ever saw her again. She told him about the quiet hours, the loneliness, the fear. He listened like every word mattered. That night, she lay in the cot inside the cabin and he slept on the floor beside her. Not touching, just near. And for the first time, she was not afraid of what came next. By the end of the first week, the soles of Lorna's feet were tough from walking the pine-shadowed slope behind Pace's cabin. She moved with the early light, clearing brush, gathering wood, her fingers chapped raw by rope and bark. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for softness. She had not come to the edge of the wilderness to find ease, only a place to live without fear. Pace worked beside her, shaping fence posts from fallen timber with a drawknife he kept honed to a whisper. He didn't talk unless he had something to say. He didn't hover, didn't offer to take tools from her hands. He let her earn her place, and in that quiet allowance, she began to feel something she hadn't known in the Ashby house or the parlor or the church steadiness. One morning, she followed the sound of an axe to find him splitting a block of pine behind the shed. His shirt was off, shoulders bronzed and slick with sweat, but it wasn't the sight of him that made her pause, it was the rhythm. The swing, the thud, the breath. He moved like a man who knew the weight of things and didn't flinch from them. "You always work through breakfast?" she asked, stepping closer. He leaned the axe against the block and wiped his brow with the back of his wrist. "Only when I can't sleep," she studied him. "What woke you?" "Dreams, old kind, about the war," she asked. He nodded, slow. "Mostly. Some come from other places, too." She didn't press. She knew what it meant to carry things in silence. Instead, she picked up one of the split logs and carried it to the stack. Later that day, a wagon rolled up from the North Trail, 2 wheels, canvas top, 1 mule. An older woman climbed down, her hands knotted with age but eyes sharp as a hawk's. She wore a faded calico dress and a hat stitched from old flour sacks. Lorna stood in the doorway, wary. The woman tipped her chin. "I'm Altha Crowley. Been selling thread, needles, and soap up and down these ridges since before most folks could ride." Pace came out from the shed, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Miss Altha," he said, "didn't expect you this soon. I saw word of a wedding in Dry Creek. Figured I'd come see what became of it." Her eyes slid to Lorna. "You the girl that left with him?" Lorna straightened. "I am." Altha gave a single nod. "Good. That man they tried to marry you to, he's got a wife buried behind the Grange Hall and a daughter he don't speak of." "You did right," Lorna blinked. "I didn't know about the daughter. Most don't. She ran off 6 years back. Folks say he beat her near blind before she did." Pace tensed beside her. Altha handed Lorna a bundle wrapped in muslin. "For your hands, tallow and willow bark. Rub it in at dusk." Lorna reached for it. "Thank you." Altha turned back to her wagon. "You've got a hard road ahead, but it's clean. That counts for something." After she left, Lorna stood at the edge of the clearing, the bundle pressed against her chest. The trees rustled with wind, and somewhere far off a hawk cried out. Pace joined her, his voice low. "You all right? I keep thinking about that girl, the one who ran." He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different. "My sister was like that. She married young, wrong man." He broke her down piece by piece. By the time she came home, she was a shadow. Lorna turned to him. "Where is she now?" "Dead." He looked out toward the ridge. "Fever took her 2 winters ago." She didn't speak. There was nothing to say that could change a thing. But she reached for his hand, and he let her take it. That evening, they sat by the fire, sharing a tin of beans and listening to the wind drift through the chimney stones. She leaned her head against the wall behind her, watching the firelight move across his face. "Do you think they'll come after me?" she asked. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Maybe, but not yet. Your uncle'll be more worried about his name than your whereabouts. He'll wait for the talk to die down." And after that, if he sends someone, I'll know. She looked at him. You can't watch every road forever. No, he said, but I can stand between you and whatever comes. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She just listened to the fire crackle and felt the weight of his promise settle beside her like a second heartbeat. When the fire burned low and the moon slid silver across the floorboards, she turned to him. What happens now? We build a life, he said. Slow, honest, whatever it looks like. And if I don't know how, he met her gaze, steady as the night. Then I'll learn with you. She leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to stay. You already are. She reached for his hand again and didn't let go. The first snowfall came early, thin at first, just a dusting over the pine needles and roof tree. Pace stood at the edge of the clearing with his hands in his pockets, watching the sky settle into a pale hush. The woodpile stood stacked to the rafters, and the smokehouse behind the cabin held enough salted meat to carry them through the lean months. Still, winter would press hard and everything they had would be tested. Inside, Lorna bent over the hearth, stitching new soles onto a pair of worn boots. Her needle moved slow, not from lack of skill but from cold, numbed fingers. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but not from silence. There was a stillness in her lately, thoughtful but not distant. She moved like someone listening for something that hadn't yet arrived. Pace stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. I found tracks by the lower ridge, he said, setting his rifle by the door. Too long between steps to be deer, might be elk. She set the boot aside and straightened. If it's elk, we'll be set for the season. I'll take the trail tomorrow, you stay here. She brushed her hands on her apron. You're not going alone. He looked at her, not with doubt but with consideration. You ever feel dress something that big? No, she said, but I can learn. He nodded once, not as permission but agreement. Later, they sat on the porch beneath wool blankets, watching the last light fall behind the slope. Lorna sipped from a tin cup, the steam curling up into the cold. Pace held a whetstone in one hand, running it careful along the spine of his knife. I've been thinking about my father, she said, not looking at him. He had a quiet way, but he never would have let me marry a man like that. Pace paused, the blade still in his hand. Then why'd your uncle have the say? Because my mother was sick and no one else stepped up. I think he liked holding the reins, liked the way folks listened when he spoke in my father's place. Pace set the knife down. That kind of man doesn't care who gets hurt, long as he's seen as right. I used to think if I just went along, everything would settle. But every day it felt like something inside me curled smaller. He didn't speak, just shifted his hand so it brushed hers beneath the blanket, barely a touch but steady. She leaned closer into the warmth. You ever think about leaving here? Sometimes, he said, but not since you came. This place was waiting for something to fill it. She looked down at their joined hands. I don't know what I'm supposed to be now. I'm not the girl who sat in that church. You don't have to be, he said. You're already more. The next morning, they rose before light and rode out, following the trail northwest. The snow had deepened overnight and their horses moved slow, breath pluming in gray clouds. Lorna rode behind, eyes sharp. By midday, they found the elk already brought down, half buried in snow, blood frozen in the dirt. Pace dismounted first, rifle drawn. Too clean, he said. Something's been here. Lorna stepped down beside him. Wolves? No tracks wide enough, human. Maybe a day ahead. They circled the carcass, finding the marks of a sled drag, boot prints leading east. She crouched beside one. Small foot, not a man. He knelt beside her. Trapper's girl, maybe, or someone running. Neither said the word out loud, but it hung between them. They moved on without touching the meat, following the tracks as far as the tree line. When they lost the trail, they turned back, pace slower, more watchful. By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had settled thick, and the air carried the scent of smoke from their own chimney. Nothing was out of place, but both of them paused before stepping inside. That night, Lorna stood at the window long after the fire had died down. Outside, the trees whispered with wind, and the snow glowed faint under the moon. Pace came to stand beside her. You think someone's out there. I think someone's lost, she said. He watched her for a moment. Would you want to find them? If I were alone in this weather, I'd want someone to come. He nodded once. Then we'll look again, tomorrow. She turned to him, her voice low. If she's running, she might be like I was. He met her gaze. Then we'll give her what you found." They didn't speak again, just stood together watching the dark, two shapes in the window's reflection, side by side, quiet and unshaken. The next morning broke brittle and gray. Wind moved low across the ridge, stirring dry snow off the pines in slow, drifting curtains. Lorna wrapped her coat tight and stepped out ahead of Pace, her boots sinking into the crust with each step. They carried no rifles this time, no need for game. They were searching for someone, not hunting. She led them northwest, toward the shallow ravine where the trail had ended the day before. It was quiet country, no birdsong, no fresh prints, just the hush of snow and the feel of eyes watching, though none showed. Pace spoke without lifting his voice. "If she's hiding, she might be watching us now. She'll wait to see if we mean harm," Lorna said. He glanced at her. "Would you have come out?" "Not until I had no other choice." They kept walking. By noon, they found a piece of torn calico snagged on a bramble green with faded white vines. Lorna crouched, brushing the snow back from the base of the shrub. Beneath it, a small, crude carving lay half buried, a rabbit whittled from pine. She lifted it gently. "A child made this," she said. Pace scanned the trees. "Then she's not alone." They moved slower after that, listening for the sound of movement, watching for signs in the underbrush. It wasn't long before they came upon smoke, thin and low, rising behind a rock outcrop. Pace stepped ahead, hands visible, voice steady. "We're not law." "Not looking to take anything." There was no reply, only the crackle of a small fire. Lorna moved to his side, then a voice, hoarse and cautious. "You armed?" "Yes," Pace said, "but it stays where it is." After a long pause, a young woman stepped into view. She looked barely grown, her face narrow with hunger and windburn. Her coat was 2 sizes too large, sleeves frayed. Behind her, a child no older than 8 peered around her skirts, gripping a slingshot in both hands. Lorna stepped forward first. "We're not here to hurt you." The girl didn't lower her shoulders. "You from Dry Creek?" "No," Lorna said slowly. "Not anymore." The girl studied her for a long moment, then looked at Pace. "You cut wood. I can see it on your boots." Pace gave a single nod. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let them closer. The child didn't move, eyes locked on Lorna with a mix of fear and wonder. "We found elk sign yesterday," Pace offered. "Your trail crossed it." The girl's mouth twitched. "We took what we needed. Left the rest." "We're not here to take it back," Lorna said. "Do you have shelter?" "A lean-to, nothing more." Lorna glanced at Pace. "We've got room if you want it." The girl's arms tightened around herself. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," Lorna said. "Pace and someone did us a kindness once. It's ours to pass on." The child stepped forward suddenly. "We can chop wood." The girl pulled him back. "Don't promise things." Lorna crouched to the child's level. "What's your name?" "Tommy." "I'm Lorna, that's Pace." "You ever sleep by a fire in a cabin?" He nodded slowly. "Once, long time back." "Well," she said, rising again, "we've got one that doesn't smoke and a roof that doesn't leak." The girl stared at them both, then finally nodded. "We'll come, just for the night." They walked back single file. The child rode behind Pace, arms tucked around his waist. The girl walked beside Lorna. "I'm Mavis," she said. "He's mine. His father's not around." Lorna didn't ask more. "You were coming from the east." "We left Rollins. Stayed ahead of trouble until the snow came." "Did someone hurt you?" Mavis didn't answer for a while. Then, "A man said he'd give us shelter. He didn't. I took Tommy and left before it got worse." Lorna didn't press. She only said, "You did right." When the cabin came into view, Mavis stopped walking. "This yours?" "Ours," Lorna said. "We built it together." Inside, the fire was still warm. Lorna lit the lantern and pulled down blankets from the loft. Mavis moved carefully, her eyes taking in the shelves, the cedar floor, the braided rug by the door. Tommy sat on the edge of the cot, blinking like he wasn't sure it was real. Pace handed him a tin cup and set a plate of cornbread beside him without a word. Later that night, after the others had gone to sleep in the loft, Lorna stood at the hearth staring into the coals. Pace came beside her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "You saw something in her," he said. "She's where I would have been, given one more week in Dry Creek." He didn't answer. He just watched her face, firelight moving across the planes of her cheeks. "I don't know what we're building yet," she said, "but it's steadier than anything I've known." His voice was low. You make it that way, she turned toward him. You gave me room to breathe, to choose, that matters more than anything. He reached for her hand, not to pull her closer, but to hold. I want this, she said, eyes never leaving his. With you, you have it, he said. And there, in a cabin warmed by fire and filled with the soft breath of sleep, they stood in stillness, two people who had run far enough to find what they'd never dared name a life not owed or taken, but chosen together. By late January, the snow had deepened to the porch rail, and the world beyond the cabin walls had gone still. The trees bore the weight in silence, their boughs sagging beneath the heavy white. Smoke from the chimney curled steady into a pale sky. Inside, warmth clung to the walls like breath. Mavis took to mending clothes beside the hearth, her needle never idle. She said little, but her movements had softened, the tightness in her shoulders easing with each passing day. Tommy spent his hours trailing after Pace, learning how to split kindling and check traps with small, careful hands. At night, he curled beneath the quilts without protest, slipping into sleep before the fire dimmed. Lorna had begun keeping a ledger in charcoal on scraps of bark peeled wood how much flour remained, the last time the creek froze solid, what seeds they'd saved in jars for spring. She carved each line with care, the marking of time a comfort she hadn't expected. One morning, as she stood at the table sorting dried beans from grit, she glanced up to find Pace watching her with a look she didn't yet have a name for. She wiped her hands on her apron and crossed to him. Something wrong, he shook his head. No, just thinking how I never pictured a life this way, slow, full. She leaned her hip against the doorframe, studying him. What did you picture? Hard riding, empty trail. Places I'd leave before they settled in me. She reached for his wrist, fingers wrapping around the worn edge of his shirt cuff. And now, I keep waking up hoping this ain't borrowed time, he said, but it don't feel like it. She looked down at their hands. I used to think peace was something you stumbled into by luck, but it's not. It's something you build. He turned his wrist and laced their fingers together. That night, Mavis pulled the quilt higher around Tommy and whispered something into his hair before she turned away. Lorna watched the way her hand lingered on the boy's back, then dropped. Later, when the cabin had gone quiet, Mavis sat at the table with a small tin of dried apple slices. She chewed slowly, gaze fixed on the window's frost-laced pane. Lorna joined her, pulling a shawl tight around her shoulders. I was 16 when I had him, Mavis said, voice low but steady. Didn't know what I was doing, not really. Everyone said I'd ruined myself. Lorna didn't interrupt. I tried to stay with his father, thought I owed him that for giving me a name to carry. But he only ever looked at Tommy like a burden. She paused. When he raised his hand to him the first time, I took what I could and left. Lorna reached for her hand. You did right, Mavis nodded. He don't remember much of it. I hope he never will. Pace, seated near the hearth, looked up. There's room here if you want it. Past winter, past thaw. Mavis looked between them, suspicion softened to something near disbelief. I don't want to take what's yours. You're not, Lorna said. This place is stronger with more hands. Mavis blinked fast, then nodded once. Then we'll stay. February passed with little fuss. The storms came lighter, and the air began to smell faintly of thaw. Lorna planted onion bulbs in flat boxes by the window, watching the green shoots rise slow and stubborn. Tommy learned to snare rabbits without bruising the meat. And Mavis began to laugh quiet, sharp-edged, but real. One clear afternoon, Pace took Lorna's hand and led her past the tree line where the land sloped gentle toward the creek. The ice had begun to split in places, the water beneath it quick and dark. He stopped where the ground flattened, a ring of stones already laid out in a neat circle. I started this last fall, figured maybe someday I'd ask. She looked down at the ring, then up at him. I didn't have much to offer then, still don't, except what you already see. She stepped closer. You didn't ask yet, he cleared his throat. Will you marry me, Lorna Ashby, not because you need to, but because you want to? She smiled, slow and sure. Yes, I want to. They married in March when the snow had melted to patches and the earth smelled like something waking. Mavis stitched a dress from a bolt of blue muslin traded from Altha Crowley, who returned with her wagon and a tin of dried lavender tucked in the hem. The ceremony was small, just the four of them, and the trees, but the vows were spoken steady. and Pace's hands didn't shake when he placed the ring on Lorna's finger. That night, they danced beneath the stars, a fiddle tune playing soft from Altha's hand-cranked phonograph, its music carrying down the ridge like a promise. By June, the garden behind the cabin grew full with squash and beans. Mavis built a chicken coop from leftover boards, and Tommy named each hen after characters from bedtime stories. Pace carved Lorna a new table from a single slab of pine, its edges sanded smooth by weeks of work. She ran her hand over it each morning, the grain warm beneath her palm. One evening, as fireflies blinked low in the grass and the smell of wild mint drifted from the creek bed, Lorna sat beside Pace on the porch steps. Her head rested on his shoulder, their hands twined in the lap between them. "We made something here," she whispered. "We did," he said. "It's ours now, all of it." He turned to her, pressed a kiss to her temple. "And it always will be." Their life stretched out before them, not easy but honest. No one came from Dry Creek, no letters arrived, no threats followed. The past stayed where it belonged, behind them. And in its place, they built something that held. They raised tomatoes and children. They weathered seasons and storms. They held each other close when the nights grew long and laughed when the days were warm and wide. And through it all, they loved each other with a quiet fierceness that never faltered, always.